conversation is going to be adult to adult. We're going to pursue some non-traditional opportunities. I'm thinking bake sales, I'm thinking tri-tips on the lawn on Saturdays to raise money to pay off meal debts, whatever that looks like. But when I listen to people talking about Santa Rosa City Schools, they're talking about engagement, about connecting a community, and having a negative impact in the lunch line wipes all of that away. And so it's important to us that we continue to provide meals to kiddos, and really do what we have to do as adults to make that happen for them. So the short answer is, we're always going to feed a kid, no matter what. I try to work that into conversations because the question comes up. We will always feed your kiddo. Second order of business, we're going to work with you to get meal apps as soon as possible, because I want the state and federal government to pay for your meals, not you. And lastly, if we have to do some outside fundraising and donations, we're going to do that.
And I guess part of my question around that was, does that bill or law provide any funding or anything to offset any of those changes? Because I think it changes from still providing alternative meals to just regular meals. Do we have any of that data or info on that bill, or is that still too new?
I do not believe there's additional funding available. It's more so a procedural. Like, there are things that you may do and things that you may not do. Some of the things that we have available to us under that law, I don't believe are a good fit. And I think that we have to exhaust all of our opportunities before we start looking at other potential outcomes. And so that's why I'm very, very adamant about meal apps. Meal apps are going to get you in the right place. They're going to help you out the district. Everybody wins if we have meal apps from everyone.
Thank you again.
Of course, thank you.
I think
We're
I should
moving
host I think you should host a bean and pot mixing video competition.
Tell you what, I'd be happy to. There was a competition. It got pretty silly. But yeah, I think that if we could, I have an idea.
I'm going to enter my bibimbap recipe
Please.
and my kimchi recipe.
I'm going to challenge you.
And everybody better use chopsticks. There will be no forks allowed.
Yes. But my question is, will there be dancing and loud music?
There has to be.
All right, the best thing you said tonight was that meals are part of how students view school. And we're not going to make them feel bad. We are going to give them a really great experience. So thank you. Thank you. That is like the best part. Thank you. All right, we're moving on to F4, discussion on addressing personnel workforce shortages and impact of the school sites in the district. I want to just point out to the board that we have until 10 o'clock tonight, or we're going to extend, so FYI.
Let's go. And
Also, we are thinking about staying after to possibly finish up the strategic plan. Yes.
We only have three. Can I make a comment on that?
three
Yes.
priorities left.
I would really like to wait to finish that when our other three board members are here. I don't think it will take that long, but I don't
All right,
know.
we'll
We
need to
have to get
schedule
this
this.
deadline. Can we somehow incorporate it into the meeting next week? So we have a meeting next week.
It's a long meeting, we can. Maybe we can do the same thing we did this week by doing closed session. Can anybody come to a little earlier than 4? Or is it too difficult? Well, the other people are.
Okay.
Yeah. We
We'll figure this offline.
But just know that I'd like to get approval for this to be passed because we want to start the LCAP focus meetings like ASAP. So.
Like to move to extend the meeting to midnight?
To Monday?
Midnight.
Oh,
That's a long time.
Or remember, we can only extend it once.
One
and
time.
yeah, it's
set
going
it
up.
All right.
to midnight.
Do I have a second? Do I have a different motion? 10:30? I only hear one motion. Do I have a second?
Oh, I heard 11. I'll take
Okay.
that as a friendly amendment.
11, second? Agreed. Ed?
Sure, let's do that right there.
You can leave the meeting to leave. 10:30,
Okay,
11.
let's go, let's go, let's go.
And with that, We have item F4 tonight. Assistant Superintendent Inspector and I are presenting to the board presentation on some comments, kind of a follow-up for the beginning of the school year. You've been presented some comments from some very significant concerns in classrooms. Special education is most notable, and we wanted to kind of give you some background and where we are on that and some of the steps we're doing moving forward on that. Historically, what we're kind of describing is in this process, there's a little bit of history and context, of course, to what's going on currently, implications and impact of what that means, and then we'll discuss strategies for what we're trying to work forward on. As you're well aware, there are many priorities that we are working through that require professional development. Professional development means that we have to pull instructional assistants and we have to pull our teachers out from classrooms and try to work with them on these areas that we know we need to improve inclusive opportunities for some of our students on the margin, of course, including special education. Some of this opportunity means that we have a number of teachers that are difficult to replace in classrooms when they're gone. You see there that our numbers around provisional temporary special education have increased. That means, as an example, there are more teachers we have to support that need more professional development, are not coming to us fully trained, and we have to provide that training, and that means, as an example, we need to support them outside the classroom. CDE comprehensive review training are examples of requirements by the California Department of Education, and they have to require us to have IEPs and consultation and correct. Reclassification, co-teaching, and PROACT training. PROACT training is a training about being proactive in prevention of student behaviors. From a special education standpoint, historically, for those of you that were not here when these initial calls were made, we have begun a 4-year process to have more inclusive education. We have developed a very important and integrated process that starts with early education, that starts with keeping our students in our schools without sending them outside of our schools, what we call their stay home, not take back. And we are trying to really be sensitive to the abilities of our campuses, and we're not talking about students that are too disruptive, what are called externalizers. And I just want to pause for a quick moment. There's a false narrative out there that our district is taking back lots of classes. And as an example, we have only taken back 2 classes. We have created new classes, and again, the term we're using is those students are staying home. So we are not sending students out to where we would have previously. And of course, to do that, you see the historical section there from 2016, 17, 18, and 19 of new classrooms we have done and created in our schools. And that's probably over 95 students that we have not sent out in the last 4 years combined.
And we also know that we have a context that we have no control over, that we do have some control over, and that we can influence. And it goes to where have all of the subs gone, not only for credentialed staff, but for classified staff as well. As you can see here, we're not alone, but just the fact that we're not alone doesn't make it okay. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what we're specifically doing to address these shortages. So some of the implications, private sector costs for substitute options. Steve, you want to talk about that for a moment, just for the contracts?
What happens if we can't fill our positions? They legally have to be filled. We have to go to private agencies. So instead of our cost of what might be $20 to $21 for a full roll of costs for a classified employee, we're paying over $30 to $35 for the same workforce because we have to hire to an outside agency.
And then when we talk about leaves, statutory leaves, while our overall leaves have increased, permissive leaves have not specifically, but with leaves it means that we have more people who are taking those, which is their right, and we want to support that, but the length of those have also increased. So there's a significant impact for the certificated, sub-needed, as well as classified in those positions. We know that many of our classified positions are part-time, and so those benefits might be prorated, so that might have an impact on people who want to seek a job. And then specifically this last bullet talks about the ability to be nimble. Public sector regulations allow for greater flexibility
even innovation and nimbleness when hiring positions or identifying a need and then being able to fill that. We know that we have education codes, we have labor law, we also have legislation such as FAPE and IDA that is very specific about who we can hire, how we can hire, when we can hire, and what that looks like. And so those are implications that impact our staffing. Some of the economy and workforce drivers that we also have to address, it's just the reality. You can see in parentheses where some of this data comes from, and then we could triangulate that if needed. But the unemployment rate is quite low right now, yet it's expensive to live here. The fire relocation has been an impact for the last 2 years, and we expect to continue to see that. And specifically the change in workforce priorities and generational preferences. People who are of different age and different backgrounds now tend to work to live versus live to work. They want flexibility. They want to take vacations at different times during the year. And we sort of have a rule: when kids are in school, so are adults. And so we have to look at what the reason is why people want to work. And we find that especially with millennial and what's called the avocado generation, is that people want to have a compelling reason. They want to know the why and not just the salary for a position. And so we have to look at those perceptions and those preferences when we look to hire and fill these positions also. So one other economic and workforce driver, you can see, we try to do a sort of a side-by-side comparison of a position we have and then the private sector correlation to that. And we're at least $1, if not 2 to 3, significantly lower than the private sector.
Another important piece of this is our positions, of course, are generally school year. What you see there, the first food service worker, instructional aide, child care, and the positions on the right are basically a 12-month annualized. So you take that same salary, put it as an annualized, and so you're creating a greater divide.
And again, in the private sector, there's greater flexibility that they can see. For example, if the unemployment rate is lower, they have greater flexibility to increase what they offer as a wage, whereas we might have to look at a contractual cycle for negotiation. It could take longer to implement new compensation.
Zeroing in on special education, this is current data occurred 2 weeks ago of various school districts, what their salary range is in a similar classification for like instructional aids, special education. One thing I do want to take note, obviously, of course, with vacancy rates is the SRCS entry pay rate is 1. It is not a sliding scale. We have been working with our union to try and create a sliding scale. We have not been successful yet. So I could have 5 years of experience and I come in 1546. That same 5 years of experience may put me at 1708 in Lincoln Valley School District as an example. Specifically dialing in for Brook Hill, we have examples of our classroom in Brook Hill where we were fully staffed at the end of the summer. And beginning of the school year, both instructional aides had left, and we have struggled, as you see, for finding those vacancies. Similarly, in Lincoln, we have 3 SH programs. In May, we were staffed 5 out of 6 instructional aid positions at that school. We came to the school this year, we had 1 out of 6 that were filled. So we are daily trying to fill those sub positions. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul. What that means is we are using our certificated sub pool to help fill these important safety situations. And of course, that further then decreases the certificated subs that are available, and it creates a ripple effect in our system.
So recruiting and hiring practices then used to be, as you can see, basic postings on EdJoin. We had what I would consider barriers to applications. For an entry-level job, you'd have to have 3 letters of recommendation. You might be 18 years old, 20 years old coming into an entry-level job. That's a huge hurdle to jump. Limited training and onboarding for job classification. Competitive compensation gaps, which we've talked about, and delayed notification of retirements and leave of absences have impacted. The cycle historically has been that we get those notifications in May or June, and then we're hiring and scrambling in June and July. We're really working with our bargaining units to say, please let us know as soon as possible. We'll help you transition out of the role so that we can then post to get new people into these positions. And so some of the things we're doing now, and actually tomorrow, if you want to stop on by, we do have a hiring fair. Going back quickly to the slide where you saw other districts, I actually was at a roundtable with my fellow HR compatriots around the county, and they all said, can we come to your hiring fair? And I very nicely said, over my dead body, because we are competing for the same people for our positions. But some of the practices is we're expediting the process. We're not providing or not requiring letters of recommendation. It's a shorter application processing time. We're actually looking into the feasibility of maybe even having our own fingerprinting machine and process to also be able to have TB tests done at the wellness center with our own staff so that that timeline is shorter. And sort of going back to that millennial approach, a broader use of social media platforms beyond just EdJoin and Craigslist, and a different pool. Some of the things too, the training piece, people want to know that they're competent in the work that they do, and so more training for our substitute staff. That goes to instructional strategies. If you're going to be serving and supporting in a classroom, you need to know what the learning is in that classroom so that you can support it. We don't just want to pay for a babysitter, we want to pay someone for their expertise and knowledge as well, and so providing that support and training. So this is some of those big what ifs, because we know, as we talked about, what we have control over, what we don't, and what we influence, and that has to do with legislation, budget negotiations, policy, etc. But we will continue to advocate for competitive salaries. You might be thinking to yourself, well, why don't we just, provide a greater salary for our classified substitutes? Well, if you currently make $15 as entry-level position for one of our CSEA classifications, and we say we're going to pay a sub in that position at 17, what would be your incentive to actually apply for the long-term position? So there's things that we have to look at in regards to that. We want to value our bilingual staff, and so we want to continue to advocate for additional compensation for that skill set. And we also know that there are ways in our hiring incentives that we can eliminate some of those barriers. For example, when we do the mandated reporter training for staff and onboarding, we're not testing in that situation for your language ability. We're testing for your knowledge of practices to protect children, for them to be safe. So we can provide that test in Spanish as well as English. So eliminating some of those barriers are actually hiring incentives as well. And then some of the places where you can find jobs with Santa Rosa City Schools. And in addition to this, we have started to have a presence on Indeed and jobs.core. And we also know that over 70 to 85% of jobs still are found through networking, referral, and that personal connection. So the more we can get our certificated and classified staff saying, for all of the things you might think are negatives, here are all of the positives for why you should work in Santa Rosa City Schools, and so we'll continue to build on that as well.
Thank you. We'll turn to questions from the board.
Director Medina.
Thank you. Quick questions. First, with the sub-staffing, I think you mentioned going to like certificated sub-pools. How much more expensive is that than like a regular classified employee?
Our certificated sub-pool goes from about $70 to $170, depending on whether you're long-term. Long-term sub positions are 5 days or more in high-needs areas such as special ed, math, and science. And so it's significantly more to pay a certificated staff than in a classified, because the way our contracts are written, a classified staff member can only be, a classified sub can only be paid what that classification is. So if you're subbing for a special ed assistant at 1546, you're going to get 1546 if you're a classified sub.
Okay. I guess what I'm thinking of is, let's say I'm a classified employee, I'm doing the job, and then a sub comes in, they're certificated, but they're doing the exact same work that I'm doing, yet they're making like way more money than I am. I think just
Correct.
how that would feel. But in terms of jobs, do we post on Cal Jobs at all?
At this time, no, we can definitely look into that.
Do we know why? I mean,
No.
Cal Jobs? That's where people that are unemployment are supposed to look. Do we have any relationships with the county's employment and training department and their ET counselors?
At this time, no. That would definitely, we could look into as well.
I think collaborating with CalWorks and employment and training counselors, which are trying to place people to work as part of the requirements for CalWorks, I think would be something to look into and like develop those relationships. And then are you just thinking about like a bilingual stipend or something along those lines?
Correct.
Would it be like a stipend or like an additional hourly thing, or do we know, or is that something we have to negotiate?
It's something that we would have to negotiate and we'd look at, but it's definitely an interest because we want to be asset-based, and that's a way to recognize that.
And would that just be for classified positions or also certificate?
We would hope that it'd be both.
That was all.
All right,
Thank you all very much.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're moving on to F5, discussion district plans during PG&E, public safety, power shut off, PS squared.
It's a verb, it's a noun. It's funny, I walk it nice.
Okay.
Good evening again. Tonight we will talk about the public safety power shutoff protocol that was enacted. Unfortunately, this presentation was created before last week's events. And it was not updated on Friday to reflect anything that happened last week, but we'll touch on some of it during this and what we're doing moving forward in light of a very stressful week that rivaled some others around here in terms of what we had to do with preparation of our school's communication and ultimately dealing with outside entities as they also had trouble making decisions and giving accurate information. First of all, what is a PSPS? It's intended to address the potential wildfires in the area with certain weather conditions by de-energizing the electrical grid. And as we can reference last week, what they said they were going to de-energize or potentially de-energize was nowhere near what they actually did. And that was quite distressing as well. It can happen multiple times per school year. It's not a singular event. As I told my teams as we were wrapping up last week, we got through this one, but there could be another one next week or the following week or the following week after that. As Superintendent Kidamura said at the beginning of the meeting tonight when she was reflecting on last week briefly, they estimate that we could have up to 6 PSPS events per year in this area, ranging anywhere from 3 to 5 days without power at some or all of our school sites, equating to approximately 18 to 30 days of missed school. The one thing that we don't know is when it's going to happen next, and then when it may happen again after that. This last time, we went through our first PSPS where no schools were affected at the end of September, where 3 schools were notified. We were notified that they would be potentially losing power, which are outlined in this presentation: Maria Carrillo, Lincoln Valley, and Hidden Valley Elementary. This last time, that was also extended to Proctor Terrace, Santa Rosa Middle, and Lewis Educational Facility. Thank you. So when that happened, that was new information to us based on what we've been told in the past, as well as the inaccuracy of the maps that were provided by PG&E that were quickly picked up by other public agencies, which caused somewhat of a bigger concern with parents and other facilities deciding to close school districts or colleges based on those maps and not the data that we used. As you can see here, this is publicly available at PG&E anytime. This was prior to last week, so you can see actually on 10/10, there was an elevated watch for a potential power shutdown. And as the weekend went through, that quickly changed to Wednesday and Thursday, and then eventually went to purple on there, showing that we were in the midst of a power shutdown event. As you can see on the right-hand side, PG&E has broken this up into very distinct regions, 1 through 9. We reside in Region 3, which goes almost near Lake County, all the way down to Gilroy. So when they say there's an event in Region 3, that's a pretty wide area where that could happen. They do give some, or try to give some information on where in that region they think it may occur, but that changes almost on every update from PG&E, as we learned last week. Through this, these were key concerns before one actually happened, and they're reality now, unfortunately. We'll talk about it on another slide, but when this was enacted last Sunday, we brought staff together immediately to start talking about what we could do prior to the Wednesday shut-off, the 4 a.m. shut-off, including going around and collecting perishable items from the 7 schools that were identified by PG&E as more than likely to be turned off. We minimized food spoilage, although we did lose some food. We made sure that medications were safe at the school site. We took a look at physical safety as much as we could, and we moved custodial staff around, had custodians during the day and nighttime custodians around at night to other school sites. We made sure that the school districts that we provide food or entities that we provide food would still need food and that we could deliver that. With the original map that came out, it did show the district office, with the exception of my office, ironically, would be without power. So that brought into, can we provide meals to our contracted school districts if we do not have power? And Director Burke, who we heard from earlier, did have supplies on hand to provide meals in the event that power was out at the district office as well. Another thing that we did is we made sure that we had enough water on site. When we checked in on Monday, we had 5,432 bottles of water in the warehouse. I remember that because it was a very exact number from Director Burke. On Wednesday, he had 5,000 more bottles delivered, and on Friday, another 6,000 bottles. So we were around 15,000 bottles of water available. In the event that we needed it during the week, if the power shut-off happened during the day, where students would still be at school. And so we still have a concern about loss of ADA for those 2 days for 6 of the schools and 3 days for Hidden Valley Elementary. CDE, as well as the state legislature, are pretty much saying that this is an emergency and considering an unforeseen circumstance where this would endanger child or staff at a school site, but they haven't came out and officially declared that, one, this is an emergency, but they are encouraging everyone to submit waivers for those attendance days. So we'll be following up on that and providing information back to the board and to our school sites as we go through this process. This is new to everybody. I also had the opportunity to sit through the Sonoma County Emergency Operations Center debrief this morning, as well as the Sonoma County Office of Education debrief early this afternoon, where those are concerns being raised at both entities of how much reimbursement they will receive for the power event last week. We also submitted our initial estimated cost of loss to the county, so that can be included in a claim going back to the CPUC as well as PG&E. Doubtful that will do anything, but it's showing that there is a real cost to these power events rather than just saving or the potential saving of a wildfire caused by electrical lines. With this, and we publicized this previously, if we have a loss of power for public safety power shutoff during the day, to the best of our ability, we will keep students in school or have school made open and available to students until regular hours. And we would not deter parents from coming and picking up students, but we want a place for them to have available to them, especially if it's a widespread power outage during the school day. We will take action to notify our service providers, as well as part of our preparation, we did buy several hundred walkie-talkies that could be distributed to sites that have lost power, so there would still be classroom to office communication that are now available. And we have enough right now for approximately the 3 or 4 sites that we figured could go down with a planned power shutdown, and we'll be making arrangements to have more in hand after the recent Southern school site outage. If it's outside the school day, when we feel we have the best information and as early as possible, we will notify staff and community that one, it's been initiated, the planned shutdown, and cancel school if power is supposed to be out prior to the start of school. As it was last week, we were notified officially on Tuesday that power shutdown will begin at midnight for the weather event that was supposed to start at 4 a.m. So as much information as we can pass along that we know is good information, we'll try and make those decisions as early as possible, as well as keeping staff and our community updated throughout the process, all with the intent of reopening schools as quickly as we can when we know that power has been restored. As Superintendent Kidmar mentioned, it was 2 minutes after the first email that 2 of the 3 remaining sites came up, and 6 minutes after the last email when the 3rd site came up that night after we were told that they had stopped checking lines and that there would be no more activations that night on lines that were unchecked prior to dark. What they failed to communicate with us is that their systems do not update in real time, so the line in question was actually checked prior to darkness, and when it was re-energized, the system updated to show that it had been checked at 6:30 or 6:15 or something, and it was all clear, just waiting for to be re-energized. So I can tell you that working with our liaison at PG&E, they had internal issues with communication, that being one of them amongst others, and much like we still have things to work out on our end, PG&E has some major issues to address if this is going to be somewhat of routine, especially during this time of year. I've touched on a few of these. We are working with our team, with Steve Mazzara's office and his staff to update school safety plans to include public safety power shutdown events. One thing that we've talked about before, but really came to light this week, was working with the city and county emergency operations centers to ensure that we were getting the best information that we could in the shortest amount of time. Some of that worked very well, and some of it was challenging. Providing walkie-talkies for intra-site communication in the event power goes down during the school day. We're also ordering battery/solar powered coolers for medication at the school site, so that those medicines or medication are not lost if refrigeration goes down during the school day. And then we're still looking at the feasibility of generators for essential services. There was talk today at one of the meetings, please forgive me, I don't remember which one, about PG&E and some other service providers providing small amounts of targeted power or targeted battery backup to critical locations and essential services in the future, but right now that is, I will say, still a dream. But we'll be closely monitoring that moving forward. We're still looking for definitive guidance from CDE on how is this going to be classified and what impact that will have to the school district and to our instructional calendar. The recovering of the loss of funding and causing financial hardship during these times. I can share that I did submit our initial really rough estimates to the county today to be included to the CPUC. The 2 days at 6 school sites and 3 days at 1 school site potentially cost the district about $400,000 between loss of ADA, the emergency preparation that we did, the overtime that was worked during that time period, the loss of network equipment that was experienced at Korea that had to be replaced the morning that school was back in session, battery replacement in our alarm system, the food spoilage that couldn't be controlled, and the loss of revenue from food sales during those 3 days were all things that were included in that initial estimate. You can see from that initial estimate, if this were to happen 3, 4, 5 times, we go from a very big number, $400,000, into the millions of dollars of potential loss, depending, especially on how CDE handles the lost instructional days and or minutes. And the last thing on here is just the need for timely and accurate information from PG&E, whether that's coming directly from them or via one of the EOCs that has greater contact, if you will, with PG&E during these times of emergency status. It's very important. Schools are treated as if they're not always appropriate to be at the table. And it's important that we remind them that we may not be first responders, but we're the first people that you call when you need emergency operation shelters or other aid in the community. And I will say this, the folks at the city have been great to work with. They understand that. The county is understanding that now too, that it's really one big team working together. And when our schools are shut down because of this impacts their workforce as well. People have to look for childcare. They may not be able to find it. It may impact key or essential workers that need to report to their EOCs or work on crews out in the field. So everyone is hearing that now. This was, like I said before, an unfortunate event. And unfortunately, it may not be the only time that happens this year. I'll be happy to go into answer any questions or go into any other detail.
Director Moore?
Like you said that you guys were gonna be like flexible on getting generators, like when it happens during school, like you guys don't have generators as in right now, so like how are we gonna still be in school with no light and like still have to go on with the day until dismissal?
Right, well, as I mentioned, we would not stop students or parents from picking their students up, but we would try and provide a safe space for students to be during the school day. And every situation is going to be different. It's going to be a different discussion if it happens at 8:01 versus 12:30, that type of thing. We just want to provide a safe place for students, and if you're already there, not knowing the other hazards that could be in the city at that time with loss of power, including traffic jams, signal outages. There were several traffic accidents that happened even last week that were people were involved. Several with just property involved, a couple with injuries to people. We just want to be able to provide a safe environment for our students and staff during that time period, and take the necessary precautions that we can to ensure that communication is there after batteries are depleted in our equipment, as well as having water and I'll say non-perishable and non-warm snacks and food available to the school sites.
Okay, thank you.
Director Medina.
Thank you. A couple things. I think I heard you mention something about like the alarms and batteries. One of the questions that also came up to me was, do our new surveillance systems, do they completely go out? So we don't have any battery backup for those as well? Okay.
Well, there is battery backup, but not for an outage of days, right? So I'm generally saying 20 to 40 minutes. Some areas of campuses will last longer depending on the load on those batteries. But that is, just like generators, very cost prohibitive on our scale. To have long-term battery solutions that could withstand several hours would be a big cost. Withstanding several days would be enormous.
In terms of communication, did we notice like a lot of people maybe trying to bring their kids to school, or was that not an issue at all? Or?
On the days that we closed?
Yeah.
The reports that I have, and I'll ask Superintendent Kinnamore as well, she heard differently, but the discussions that we had, there wasn't an issue. Parents seemed to be notified. I'm not saying that every parent got it, but principals did not report issues at their school site on Wednesday morning or Thursday morning that I'm aware of with parents trying to drop students off.
That's correct, I got the same report.
In terms of economic impact, just because we've been talking about buses, I'm wondering in any of those districts or schools, were there buses, and if we were still required to pay for buses, even if they weren't used, I don't know how our contracts work, and if that was a cost.
Well, we did cancel buses prior to even, and I will say that I will follow up on this as well, but I would say even because of how we pay for our buses on a 3-year rolling average, the loss of 1 or 2 days for maybe 7 bus routes isn't going to be that substantial in the overall cost of busing.
Okay, and the other question I had was, it sounded like you did like an EOC evaluation or something like that today or recently, but I'm wondering, have we done something in terms of like, we look at like what we learned, what we did well, what we could do different, maybe what resources we need next time, and if so, is that something that we can, like, I don't know, get like a written report of, or something that we could look at in the future, along with like the economic impacts that occurred?
Yes, we'll bring that back. We're still picking up the pieces from last week.
And I would say that we've got it pretty dialed in. What we've got control over, we've got it dialed in. What we don't have control over is what gets us into a frustrated pattern. It's internally, our systems are pretty good because we learned from these last 2 years and did after actions after those. But the thing that we have to contend with is that we are not thought of as a partner to be at the table at the EOC. That's really dependent. It's been provided to SCO, but then SCO, we get information before SCO does. So we feel like because we're the largest district, we should be at the table, and we're going to make that push. The other thing is, in my board report to you folks, I feel like we should declare ourselves having our own EOC. through resolution and through board policy, so we can use that, push our weight around to get at these tables. So that's what's gonna happen, we're gonna do that. That's one of the things that we learned, the biggest thing we learned this time, was that, and that, we learned you can't depend on anybody's maps, because they're online, because none of them are right. So,
And I think, I really like the sound of that idea of like us in our own EOC and then just, I don't know, just pushing a wing around sounded really good, so I like that. I guess the other thing I just would want to say is that, you know, I'm very thankful for all the staff that we have and all the hard work that y'all put in. I felt like I, as a board member, was really well informed as to what was going on. It sounded like y'all were working really hard, and so just thank you for all your hard work.
thank you for recognizing that.
Thank you.
Director Sheffield?
Just two quick questions. I'm wondering, and maybe Diane, this is for you. I'm wondering who's calling into question our role in regards to the EOC?
Well, let me put it this way, because of our relationships with various people, we manage to get on calls when we probably aren't supposed to be. So,
But that's what I'm saying, is who's saying what
county, I mean,
when-
it's PG&E, it's county, it's everybody. I mean, it's,
I get that, and I recall when the fires hit, there was some issues as well around who's getting what briefings, and we learned a lot of lessons there. We learned that the more people that are getting the information, the better. And we can have a discussion offline and maybe even off record, but because this is a real problem, and I think that it's a matter of talking to a couple of the right people to say, hey, forget what protocol was. We see what happens when information is not distributed countywide or regionally to the right people and the most accurate information, the most up-to-date time. That's something that we can take to our higher up elected officials to make sure that we are included. And if it's a simple conversation with folks at the city, it sounds like the city wasn't the issue, or folks with the county, then we'll have the conversation with the supervisors. And if it means that somebody at PG&E doesn't feel as if we are or should be a party in this discussion, then that's something that can be taken at the state level and board PDC.
and I think your colleagues, I think your voices to your colleagues around the city and county are extremely helpful. I also think that somehow the message has to be, yes, SCO is the county entity, and they do a lot and we're appreciative of them, but we are the largest district, and so we're a whole different organization than our counterparts, our smaller districts. So there's too many people depending on us to make decisions, and we can't wait. We were told by one entity, we're not going to talk to individual school districts, because I'm sure what they think, but I think they're thinking in their mind, the 39 other districts are going to call them.
I get that.
You know, but this is the 16,000 student district with so many employees. So it's really not isolated. It's kind of all the way around. We push our way, we get our way, we find a way to get in there, but we shouldn't have to do that.
Even if it's school district, we have 39 additional people on a briefing call. Who cares?
Who cares?
Put them on mute.
Exactly. The PG&E line that we weren't supposed to be on had over 1,000 people on it, and it crashed.
Yeah. Well, you know.
Oh well, they should have let us all on there, because they can mute us. They can mute us out, you know, in their internal systems. Yeah, so this is something that, you know, I would love for the board to just spread the word about San Jose City Schools needs to have its own EOC and a seat at the table. So.
Okay, in the second, real quickly, I'm assuming that there was, Friday, when we did call back 2 or 3 schools, right, that there was probably not the greatest attendance. And I'm wondering if that ADA was factored into the $400,000 number that was given for the cost of this.
we're still running reports on material loss of ADA for schools in session across the district. And if we show material decrease at any of the school sites, we're going to put in a waiver for those schools as well. But I can't provide information tonight on individual schools that came back on Friday, if their attendance was.
Yeah, I mean, I know, because I saw it at my
At your
kids'
school.
school, and even talked to parents and said, you know what, we had 2 days, I took my kids, we went out of town, we went, what else were we gonna do? Not sit around and wait for them,
Right.
and I get that,
I do
you
too.
know,
Yeah.
unfortunate, but, right.
And that'll all be included when we bring back, probably not the next meeting, but the November meeting.
If we have any information about attendance for my Friday updating time, I'll put it in my Friday update.
So yeah, the November meeting, we probably bring the waivers back.
Yeah.
That's all.
You know, you have a full-time job, we have a full-time job, but this was a full-time job. So I thank you for your leadership. It was loud and clear, the leadership from the site administration was exemplary. Thank you.
Thank you. We also ordered for all of the sites a solar charger for phones. So each site will have one of those as well.
My phone, my power was out for 3 days where I lived and the cell stuff went down.
Yeah, that was a point of contention today as well, that the cell signal started degrading. Thursday evening was what was widely noticeable going into Friday.
I think, yeah, I was gonna say, I think, I didn't have the power out, but I did experience both cell service as well as like data, internet service that was both facing issues too, so.
All right, our final item tonight is F6, continuation of strategic plan.
So I did put it in there in case we didn't finish, but I have a plan. How about during the November 6th, when we have the bond update, we make that the final approval, and then on October, our next meeting, we'll do some time either in closed session, before closed session like we did this time. How does that sound? Okay, so that we get the final approval still by November 6th, and that gives staff enough time to get at least one group together, I hope, in November.
And I think it's really important because Jen and Stephanie will have that meeting also. So
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to hear
It'd be great if the whole board could be here, so.
Okay. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.